Simply enchanting, James. There are so many great ideas in this score, and it, I think that the biggest problem here, I mean, obviously, you are developing in your capabilities as an orchestrator. Okay, but what I would say is probably smoothness of transition and also like a sense of proportion in your phrasing. Okay, so those are like the main takeaways for me that I would say that you should work on. Okay, and then of course there are lots of little details that that are important for me to point out. So I'll do that as I go. Right. So here you have solo espressivo, right, and you've got hairpins here, nuances, which is good. And you also are, you have nuances in your accompaniment as well. Now, you don't really actually need them in the, I mean, it's sort of like having a background that sort of surges in and then pulls out again, right? Um, when you think about the piano part, really, like it's really the melody that does most of the surging and most of the expressive nuance, right? So really, it's the melody line more than the accompaniment that needs to have the surges in it, right? But like you left that out here. Now, if you have a passage like this, you don't need to mark piano over and over again. It's understood, right? The hairpin increases the dynamic level, decreases it, increases it, decreases it. So you're going to come back to where you started, right? So you don't need to mark the piano twice. Okay, same thing like right here, right? Um, so I don't know if you noticed, but there was just a big clunk right here, right at the beginning. So that was, as the rest of the orchestra came in, it was very punchy, right? So da 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 pow, right? There just like was just a real sudden jolt forwards. So you might want to think about like a few things that would decrease that kind of sudden jump, and that would be like lessening overall is something that you should probably practice. You do it from place to place. Like here, you decrease the volume of your brass a little bit, but in other places you don't. Right? You've got your brass just as loud as your winds and strings, so you really do need to bring it down a bit. Right? Like even like right here, I would say pianissimo. You might also want to think like what is what instrument is going to blend the best with strings and winds in this sort of kind of lower harmonic texture. And it's probably horns more than it is trombones, right? Trombones are great for bulking things up. They're great for playing a kind of a sort of like a pianistic, like a big left hand pad, where your hand is stretched out over a tenth, that kind of a thing. But they're not so great with blending with other instruments, right? So they're going to add just a very jolting beginning to this fifth bar, right? Whether you were to change to horns or to stick with trombones, it should definitely be pianissimo to everybody else's piano dynamic, right? And if the melody line increases here, right, then the curve is going forwards, and the arc of the dynamics is going forwards, and the piece gains will just gain naturally in force. You might want to think about bringing in certain elements earlier, like the doubling the violin, or the use of the second violins here as a harmonic element. All right, so there's a lot that you could do. You could have figuration and other kinds of things rather than just a static pad, right? So it's just like, I mean, it's something that is pretty evident from the mock-up. And as always, I'm not saying that anybody should score to the mock-up, but it does sort of reveal certain things from time to time that are true, right? So, and the same thing right in here. The horns coming in, they should come in at piano to mezzo forte and then back down, right? If you're going to start piano in the next bar, then you should go down to pianissimo here by the end, okay? So that way you just really control things. Now, I noticed something here that you sort of stuck everybody on the same line. I would actually want to have two percussionists covering this part, right? It just is easier. Like you've got a cymbal roll, and then the player's got to put down their mallets, and then immediately pick up a triangle beater and hit the triangle. So, you don't. And the other thing is, you do not need to mark a like X note heads. Okay. Just mark a regular note head like this, right? There's really no need to. Yeah. So and then here, piatti. So it is more than suspended cymbal, right? So here you are playing the dishes, right? So this is a cymbal pair, right? So I'm happy with these entries to have the different instruments on different single lines, and to have the notation just be a standard, just a standard note head rather than these X heads. Okay, that's really not so much a concert music thing. So, so other than that sort of proportional question, the scoring is okay. It's just that the other thing that is sort of a bit of a jolt is the way the strings take over here, and then the winds just suddenly drop out, just kaploof, right? And I mean, you're pushing the resonance, you're pushing the brass right in here, and that's sort of the overtones of the brass kind of fill in what's missing in the winds, but it's not really an elegant way of transitioning. Just to let you know, right? So, I would say just reduce the brass, and maintain or pull out of the winds, because you just really will hear a sudden drop off here, and slackening of texture as the strings go forward, right? That is something that the mock-up is actually telling you the wrong thing, right? Okay. So moving on. This is very cool. Clarinets plus strings. It just has a beautiful, edgy sound. A very full sound, right? Now here, it just really, like, there's no doubling of anything except for the melody and the little bit of harmony right under the melody. Right? So we're running into this problem again, that the melody is actually the middle voice right in here. Da 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 da. Right, it's really D sharp, C sharp. So so the upper note. I mean, it's good that you included both of them, but it's the upper note that's getting doubled by first clarinet, and there's no doubling on the actual melody, right? So that's going to weaken that, right? Just generally speaking, you could have doubled more here, like, bassoons could have doubled some of what's happening in the violas, for instance. You could have had a more integrated sound in there had you wanted. But there's, certainly nothing wrong with the approach that you took. The only thing I would say is that I would have wanted, even if it was just like throwing in oboe right in here, I would still have wanted that. Now, speaking of oboe, there's kind of a strange thing here that you have marked like three clarinets, three flutes. Flute 1 plus piccolo 2, 3. So that you wouldn't want to mark things like that. You would want to say, flutes 1, 2, and 3, and then like flute 2 piccolo, right? Or flute 3 piccolo. Right now, it doesn't really say that the first flute is doubling on piccolo, but that is what yeah, actually you do say that here, right? So it's really the third player that that generally covers the auxiliaries, right? Or the second if you have a smaller orchestra. So yeah, I wouldn't give the first part to the piccolo player. I would just change things around, right? If you tell the third player to play the piccolo, then they can get that ready right here, right? And then you leave it to the first player to provide the leadership that's really required right in here. Okay. Okay. But like back to the oboe, here it just says oboe, which kind of makes me think, well, you just had a single oboe amongst all these other winds. But then you write one, and then here you write intervals, right? So watch out for that. Be exact about who you're assigning at the beginning of the piece. Now your horn scoring is great. The 1, 2, 3, 4. You got the order, the harmonic order correct, and everything. That's great. And then when you just have intervals or simple unisons, you're giving them to the first and second. So that is also great. Okay, now moving on to just the scoring, or getting back to the scoring. Dun 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 dun. So my only critique here would be that in the piano score there is a dynamic contrast, right? First, it's sort of medium loud, and then it's pianissimo, right? So that is not reflected in the dynamics that you've got here. So basically, it's just kind of repeating the same idea, right? So it's emphasis by repetition, which is something that we see in poetry and in some music and so on. Mussorgsky is full of emphasis by repetition, which sounds beautiful with his music, right? Because there's a sort of a folk origin to a lot of what he does. But here I would say that it would help, like da 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 dun 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 dun. Something else worth exploring is whether or not some of this could have had staccato or mezzo staccato, which would be a slur over the staccato, or some people even added tenuto staccato if you've seen some of the other entries, right? But just like having variations of articulation. That said, I really appreciate that you broke up a lot of the big, long slurs from the piano part. That was a very wise thing to do. Okay. Now, here, you've got your piano to mezzo forte. Like, it really is a big push right in there. I don't know if you really need that right in the middle, twice. So if you really intend this, then I think you need to mark piano again. Okay. And there just seems to be a lot of, it's sort of like handlebars. It's sort of, like really telling the player every single dynamic all the time, right? Which, yeah, it's great to be specific, but it's, once again, not necessary to repeat dynamics that are implied, right? But if you really are, just telling the player every single, where you're getting to and so on, it is useful to mark once again in a new phrase that it's going to be the same thing again. But then you have the problem that the player might just assume that you mean that it's a crescendo to mezzo forte over and over and over again. And when you think about it, the dynamic arc of each of these two bars is really the same, right? Whether you intend it to be mezzo forte in the middle here or not. It's just constantly, pushing and then pulling, pushing and then pulling, right? Which is really the same as the beginning. So I would just say watch out for, repetitive dynamic nuances, right? There's you really want to vary things because if dynamics is one of the things that that helps us inform meaning into a phrase, right? So if we are constantly using the same dynamic, very, very small changes over and over again, we start to take away the overall meaning. It's sort of like writing a book where all of the sentences are only 5 words long, right? So that's kind of what's going on here. It's really breaking up the phrasing into very small bits in terms of, emotional meaning. Okay, now here, bum 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 bum. I felt that that this suffered a little bit by not having very strong low end. Right now, if we take this apart and look at it, we've got we've got the melody on top, which is good, and then we've also got, like, sort of a triple octave with harmonization in it with the strings. And right here you could have just had everybody in the string section playing those F sharp octaves, including the cellos yet another octave below. Right? It's just the thing about this is that it puts a lot of weight in the treble, and there's very little support from the bass. Right? The bassiest thing that you've got going on here is like this kind of bottom line here of the bassoon, right, and just like kind of weaker, a weaker area for the violas. I mean, actually, no, I mean, it is strong there, but it is sort of weaker to rely on them to supply the bass right in here, right? Now you're trying to balance things, and that's great, but yeah, you've got trumpets against clarinets. Interesting, you could have used A clarinets here, right? And then you would have ended up with a much simpler key signature for the players to play in. But anyways, and also same thing here. You could have had trumpets in C, right? And then, it probably, I don't know if it makes a huge amount of difference, but the higher notes just would be easier to play with the C trumpet. Like that would not be like a high B flat, right? It would be written lower on the C trumpet and just easier to play. Right? So going back to here, so trumpets plus clarinets is going to it's going to have it's a very bright sound, a kind of a jazzy sound there, right? And then you're sort of filling in the harmony with bassoons, kind of in the middle of the next octave, or taking some of that harmony plus the horns right in here, right? And it's kind of interesting how you sort of really back out from the texture right in here, and then leave it to the winds and the strings. So yeah, once again, I feel that in terms of transition is a little it's a little abrupt. You could have easily brought these brass like down to pianissimo, I think, so that if you really wanted them to ease out more elegantly, right? So da 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 da. Yeah, so why mark mezzo forte twice if there's no diminuendo, right? So da 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 da, just leave that out and then just hit this nice and hard. Okay, but I mean, look, I am critiquing you on transitions, but I'm not unaware that you were trying to make them smoother, right? I am aware of the fact that you were making an effort with that, so I do understand that. Just trying to make that a better feature. Okay. Okay, so going on. Bum 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 da 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 dun 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 dun. This is actually really really fun scoring right in here. If you got triple winds, triple flutes and triple clarinets, and you can really supply a lot of harmonic filling in, then no reason why not to. This is very cool also, just starting with this kind of accented note there. So this is going to work fine. You don't need to subdue the dynamics here for these horns. But yeah, right in here, I would say B flat trumpet. It's a bit of a trap, right? Because you have to go all the way up to that high B flat, and like not just completely whale on the flute and oboe parts, which you are going to, right? If you're going to add this big line right in here, and especially at forte, nobody is going to hear the winds on top, right? And in fact, the prominence of the trumpet will also drown out harmonic pitches that are near it and under it. It just has that quality, right? So, yeah, I mean, you leave off of the flute as it gets down into territory where it would be easily played over. Okay, that's wise, but it's still, it's almost as if the oboe is really not going to contribute anything with the trumpet that loud, right? So, but then there's the other problem, like, which is playing that high B flat. Like if we were to say, well, bring it down to mezzo forte, that high B flat is going to want to shine, right? It'll still drown out everything else, even if you bring the dynamics down a little bit, and just in quality of texture alone. So yeah, so it's just a question of how much the upper curve of your arc is going to contribute, really. So if you are able to bring down the dynamics sooner, then it'll make more sense for these other contributors to the texture. All right. Okay. Now, bum resolution. Okay. So yeah. So here we've got kind of more of a tutti. With, I mean, some of this stuff doesn't need to be divisi, especially if you're playing against very strong brass and winds, right? So, like, I mean, for instance, this this octave here, D octave, is one of the easiest double stops to play, and then sixths are just dead easy to play, right? So this could be non-divisi, and then you could go to divisi here, right? Now, I'm not sure why you want to have desk 1 in your violins. That is going to make this element in the harmony incredibly weak compared to everybody else. Right? I mean, unless everybody is going down to like 1 or 2 desks here, then I don't really see the need for you to control this. And the other thing too is like endless fiddling around of, like, when other instruments are divisi, imagining that therefore, to balance it absolutely correctly, there should, if there's only one note in another string part, it should be half the desks, right? So just get away from that thinking, right? The strings will balance whatever you give them divisi or not. Okay, and the same thing is applying here. These are very easy double stops to play. You do not need to go to divisi in the second violins here at all. All right, so the whole question is whether or not this will balance, and yeah, so once again, it feels really abrupt. So because like you've got almost nothing going on here, da 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 da, right? Just a little bit of harmonized flutes, clarinets, and so on, and yeah, the second flute right in here, or third flute as you've scored it, is really going to be invisible, and the upper flute part is going to be extremely subservient to the top clarinet part, even if they're really controlling what they're playing, especially if you are mixing it further down with the first violins, right? So you might want a little bit of a rethink there, whether or not the flutes are even necessary at all here, right? If you've got the clarinets going, they're going to absorb the sound of the flutes quite well, along with the string doubling, so that the flutes are really not contributing much, if anything, right? Especially when the you've got trumpets playing alongside that, the flute is just becomes completely unnecessary. So, yeah, it just feels like a sudden jolt here, right? The way that it was scored. So once again, transitions, right? Maybe the brass could have come in a little more gently and then pushed, or they could have come in a little earlier gently and then pushed into this texture. The last thing, it just really is balance. Is a balance issue. The brass will be pretty much all you can hear here, the way that you've got it scored. So if you want the quality of texture there, the quality of timbre of the strings and winds to make a difference there, then the brass would just have to be marked down. You know, maybe piano crescendo to mezzo forte. Right? There's some missing crescendo marks here. And here. Okay, so just, might need a bit of a rethink with the way that you've got this. And once again, you do not need to go to desk 1 there for the second violins. All right, now we get to this part. And actually, the scoring here is way, way better than the first screen. Or I don't know, better and worse. It's kind of really subjective things to say. More balanced across the scope of the orchestra, right? There's still some dropouts from time to time, lower voices, texture, and so on and so forth. That it just feels like there are some decisions that are being made in really simple terms on some bars, and then much more expansive orchestral decisions being made in other bars, right? So like the beginning is great, the tuba, the timpani, the cellos, just really providing much needed bottom end here. Now here, all you need to do is just mark a dotted half note, or even just a half note, and say forte sostenuto, or just SOS period, right? The sense that these instruments are going to really carry a sustained tone for a long, long time and continue to allow the membrane of these drums to vibrate is probably something you're not going to see a lot in regular scoring like this. There are really fine texturalist scorings or orchestrations where where there are effects of very long sustained pitches on timpani and bass drum, but generally speaking, the concert hall, is the resonating chamber, and the shell of the timpani or bass drum is what gives the instrument its quality of tone, right? Or its character of tone. So it's kind of a mistake to think of timpani as just being this instrument that like has a sustained quality that you can turn on and off, right? And a lot of times, percussionists will want to actually just damp the bass drum almost immediately, because the continuing vibration of the head is something that can just be considered to be distasteful. Something that you can actually kind of sort of hear and kind of is a little interfering sometimes with other things going on, right? So please feel free to just mark a quarter note, maybe a half note at the most. Maybe just mention that it's sostenuto, but don't really insist on really hugely long pitches. Because in a case like this, the strings are going to absorb any kind of sustain that's going on in the timpani anyway, right? Even just here, hitting this bass drum, this low double bass note is going to absorb any kind of sustain that is going on, right? So it's just kind of, in a practical sense, it really isn't achieving anything to imagine that, to request that really long sound. Okay. So now, back to the big restatement. Ba-da-da-dum. I like this. Da-da-da-da-dum. And I really love the way that you've broken down this slurring, and it just makes so much sense, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. And like you could have continued with that pattern here, right? It just would be easier on the players. And you got your clarinets, clarinets and horns. It's nice, and then you sort of pull it in a little bit here, which is very cool. Um, yeah, I mean, I like the role of the harp here, and just the way that you really start to rely on it as a stronger element. And of course, like the ending, well, I'll have a lot to talk about. And it's also just once, as I was saying, enchanting. Just great ideas in here, and just lovely, lovely ideas in scoring, right? So it's just a question of transitioning between those ideas and the sort of the proportion of the ideas against one another, right? So, yeah, this is kind of interesting, kind of simulating the role of the harp, kind of all together, and the celesta. So it's just a question of whether or not everybody's going to roll the same way, right? And as you can hear from the mock-up, like the mock-up has no idea that this is meant to be coordinated, right? So you sort of hear, you hear rolls following rolls rather than everybody just kind of like almost strumming through the chords together. And that's something that will be better with a real orchestra. Right? So other than just kind of starting to lose lower texture right in here, I think it's pretty good. This I really do love this. I love this page. I think it's nicely done. Still a few tweaks that you might want to add in here, and just maybe, yeah, maybe just watching out for just the continued use of the same kind of push pull sort of dynamics throughout, rather than having maybe kind of a longer opening up of the music. Okay, so now we're getting into that sort of final section. Ba da da dum, bum 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 bum. Okay, so starting very very simple here, I would say if you really want flute to sound like anything, like to be able to take a leading role here, then you have got to bring your brass down to very soft, right? Because the overtones of the horns alone will just bury the what's beautiful about the flute. You'll still be able to hear the flute at the dynamics you've got it scored, but it's like its beautiful overtones, its qualities will just be absorbed by the brass. So I would say pianissimo brass here, and now that's a really neat idea. Cellos and solo flute, maybe solo cello and solo flute would work better there, right? And then really soft brass behind it. Now here, like, they're by giving the little falling rose petals to the same instrument that is playing the melody, then you are incapable of having any of the texture continue underneath the falling rose petals. In fact, there is no texture going on, right? So here's another problem of transition, right? What happens in the music? Well, the piano hits this, the pianist goes boom, ching, and then the piano, the pedal holds the sound of the chords under the little falling gestures, the little falling figure, right? So that's absent here, right? You just basically cut it off, and then suddenly these instruments are just all alone, right? So I mean, if that was a decided choice, like you really wanted to do that, then that's fine. But there's something, some of these instruments continue a little bit longer. It's just a little, I'm just a little unsure about the exact, like whether you understood that the accompaniment should continue on in terms of transcribing that. But I mean, if you made a decision not to do it, I respect that. But yeah. And this is kind of interesting. Da 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 da. right? So like the way that you have like slurred this. Uh, I will say one thing though, that right here you have two very different colors. You've got your flutes and oboes. You've got clarinets and bassoons. So really what you need to do here is, if you want this to be a smooth transition, then the, sorry, did I say clarinets and oboes? Clarinets and bassoon. You want your clarinets and bassoon to dovetail right on this note, right? So just have the clarinets play this along with the flutes, and the first bassoon come in on this note along with the oboe, right? And then you'll have a very smooth, once again, transition, right? We want smoother transition, so you'll have things dovetail, and just like the timbre will trade off. Not the most elegant trade off, but still better than just suddenly jumping to the other sound, right? To the jumping from the sound of low flutes to throat tone clarinets. All right. Then, continuing on, the strings take over, and this is actually fairly nice. Once again, there is zero reason to go for desk one here in the second violins. Like, they're basically, what is going to happen here is that this is going to just really be almost a meaningless note, right? Compared to everybody else's force of or presence, projection. Now you might be thinking, well, I had the desk one because I didn't want the second violins to interfere by holding a note past the same note in the melody, right? Well, forget about that thinking. It's not a problem. Okay, everybody's balancing everybody else. They know not to step on each other's toes, right? Here you need the same slurring pattern for the melodic part. All right, so I would just say, just get rid of the desk one stuff, right? You're not doing incredibly delicate texturalist kind of scoring here. You're doing more standard, more mainstream orchestral transcription, right? At least that's the approach that I'm seeing so far, the general approach, right? So with that, this kind of idea is out of place. So your little cascading pitches are okay, except that like see here, you're trying to get around the problem of the melody note also being, or excuse me, the melody instrument also then taking over the falling rose petals, right? And like here, you're getting around that by having the second violins come in here, and I guess like the slurring pattern, you're going for a different slurring pattern because like it's hard for you to figure out how to slur across, right? Like you can't really slur from the seconds to the first. So maybe it would be better just for the seconds, and just for everybody all together to play all of this, right? And to just have the firsts just continue holding, right? And same thing here for the all of these supporting elements to continue holding. Yeah, once again, no need for a desk one here. Okay, now continuing on with a melody, bum 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 da da da, and yeah, and the melody note is, the melody instrument is continuing with the little figure, right? So I mean, it's easy to kind of like imagine that might be what is needed just by the context of how the piano part works. But you also have to think about like how Lili scored it, right? Which was as two separate elements. And there is a lot to be said for that kind of thinking, right? Now here you're supplying some of the some of the harmony in the background, and that could have continued on under the descending figure, but but like in this case, you've also chosen to use that, so that there's kind of no way out here, right? So that there will once again be an abrupt transition with no real foundation to, like, nothing to, to continue on under these figures except for just just a little bit of bass, right? So yeah, the drop off here is going to be felt. Now, having said that, there's nothing really all that wrong with the way this is all set up. It's actually just rather nice. As I was saying, very charming. There's the general approaches of different phrases and different ideas. It's just it's just really nice. It just really brings me hope that everybody's imagination is so different. That strength and diversity. It's really what's needed in music today. Just like everybody having coming from their own place, rather than there being like schools of thought, right? Rather than everybody trying to be an impressionist, or everybody trying to be a maximalist or a minimalist. That really, people have their own voices as orchestrators and composers and so on and so forth. And the absolute truth is that, like, even minimalist composers really sound different from each other, and so do impressionists and everything else. Like, and most composers we would call impressionists would reject the term. So anyhow, going on, I really love this. And you know what? I actually find it beautiful that you brought this down just like really small and kept it very intimate. I would recommend, in order for this to work in that context, that that these like figures, they're this little passage right in here should have a diminuendo. So just like to really bring it down to very soft. And then it becomes like flute plus harp, and that works great. And the flute could have continued tying this F sharp for quite a bit longer as the harp sort of works things out. And yeah, I would actually want there to be more harmonic context here within within the harp, whether it's just taking parts of the same chord and expressing them inside the octaves as they play. And then finally, yeah, of course, this would be scored out differently across two hands in a real harp part, right? But I appreciate that you did this. You have this is something that I did as well, just to make Note Performer work, to make the Sibelius playback work. There really needs to be like global roll markings, so that if you have one of these global rolls across two staves in the same instrument, that it'll just roll from bottom to top. But yeah. Okay, so, and then continuing on, this last little celesta and flute is just so adorable. It really is adorable. And this, you added an extra bar in here. It only goes da 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 da, and then it goes da. So you sort of added 3 extra beats right in here. But all the same, just beautiful and subtle, and just another way of interpreting all this stuff. So yeah, just makes me so excited to look at a score like this, and to just see like the potential of the orchestrator, and like see like and think about like where you are going to be in a year, James, if you just keep orchestrating and keep working on your craft, and thinking about some of those aspects that I mentioned. Like, I mean, what an incredible score this would be if you worked out some of those problems, right? I mean, it already is beautiful, imaginative, great work. But just imagine how much better you can make this, how much stronger you can make your scoring overall, thinking about how to get from one place to the other in a really smooth way, right? So maybe focus on that between now and the next orchestration challenge, which I guess at this point is going to be in about 13 months, because I would really like to go back to holding these in the middle of North Northern Hemisphere summer, like from my birthday in July to my mother's birthday in August. And, I just really, please contribute another score. I think that the next selection is also going to appeal to your particular sense of proportion and the way that you like to score and everything else. I think it will have a lot to challenge you to come up with like even better things, and especially working on transition and balancing of elements, not just balancing of scoring, right? So great work, James. I mean, just really happy with that, and really glad to have this as part of the challenge. Sometimes like there'll be a really polished score and it'll get a lot of comments and people say, "Hey, good going," and people even say that to me about my orchestration lessons of like what my interpretation of the challenge should be. But what really excites me, as much as those scores, is seeing something like this where there is an orchestrator who's really on the road and just picking up steam and just really just getting so much better and definitely heading places, right? Rather than having arrived, right? So that is, to me, that is just as great, right? So thank you so much, James, for this excellent entry, and I really look forward to seeing what you might do next, and just keep going with it. And thank you so much for your support of the channel. It means a huge amount. And also, if you have any insights, feedback, compliments for your other Brev participants, please do leave them either under the comments of the YouTube videos or on the Patreon feed or in Facebook when I drop it there. Okay? Thank you so much. So I'm on to another marathon day of evaluating several scores in a row, so I better get to that after a little bit of breakfast. But yeah, thanks for being my first score today, and I will be on to more evaluations in a little bit.